Chapter 36. To lay the trap for Narcissus, Apollo stayed on Mount Olympus. He was going to lounge around on the lower level with his sister and Torrent while Athena hid nearby with several other Greek gods. Olympus was open to all Greeks, so Narcissus would be able to enter the territory without a problem, but Apollo would still be protected. It sounded perfect, and I was more than happy to leave it in their capable hands. I went home with my husbands and had a relaxing evening with my daughter, my men, and my cat. We turned the TV toward the bed and sprawled out together while we watched a movie, Bird Box. Oh, so many great quotes and so many questions. What the hell? Trevor huffed as I clicked off the TV. Lesya was fast asleep, curled in against her father's chest. Her hair trailed behind her in a mass of dark curls. I started to braid it for bed as I lifted a brow at Trevor. Seriously? Trevor asked. That girl was supposed to be named Ariel, or even Cinderella. There was a whole selection of names already picked out for her. I chuckled. It was an odd movie. Mainly I'm wondering how those damn birds survived the rapids in a shoebox. Exactly, Odin said. Birds are fragile, and that box was not waterproof. I'm taking Lesya to bed, Kirill said after I finished her braid. Movie Vass. Too vague. That's all I have to say about it. I leaned in to kiss Lesya's forehead before Kirill carried her up to her bedroom. I'll walk with you, Trevor offered. I'm turning in before I start overthinking Bird Box. My other husbands looked at each other hopefully. If Trevor wasn't staying, it meant that he was giving up his bed rights for the night. The other men were on a rotation for times like this. You were next, Azrael, Odin reminded the angel. Azrael grinned as if he'd won the lottery. I just shook my head as I went to the bathroom to freshen up. Judging from Azrael's look, my night was only getting started. Sure enough, when I got back to bed, I found it empty of everyone except AZ, who was completely naked and posing like a Playgirl model. Midnight wings made a beautiful backdrop for Azrael's sleek, muscled body. He had one arm bent behind his head and one knee bent up to show off his delicious body. I started to shed my clothing as I headed to bed. Azrael's sleeping shaft stirred to life as I stripped. By the time I reached the bed, it was pointing straight at me like a compass toward north, and Azrael's blue eyes had turned into diamonds. He let out a low sigh as I crawled up the bed to him and then lowered his leg so I could settle atop him. His wings shivered, a living feather blanket beneath us. I leaned over him and buried my face in his wings to breathe their scent in deeply. Sunshine on cedar. I loved the scent of Azrael's wings nearly as much as I loved the vanilla orchid smell of his body. The soft cedar scent added depth and masculinity to his sweet skin. As I straightened, Azrael's hand slid up my flanks and crept forward to cup my breasts. His thumbs rubbed circles over my nipples until my thighs clenched around his waist and my breath started pumping in a fast rhythm I wanted to mimic with my hips. Should I put away my wings? Azrael asked. No, I said immediately. Keep them out. I want to see them spread above me. Later. Later. Right now I want to ride you, Angel, I purred as I reached between us and angled myself onto his shaft. We both groaned as his flesh united with mine. Tingles spread out from where we were joined, and I reveled in them a moment before I began to move. Barely lifting my hips, I ground more than rode him, but Azrael didn't mind. His eyes started to glow and sparkle as I rolled my sex against his. His hand shifted to my hips and pressed me harder against his pelvis as I leaned over his chest and covered his mouth with mine. Slick tongues twisting and lips moving savagely against each other. Our kiss was the spark that set our passions kindling aflame. I groaned and picked up my pace, but AZ would have none of that. He pulled out of me and dragged me up his body by my hips as he simultaneously slid down the bed and between my thighs. I pressed my hands against the glass window behind our bed. A lush, jungle-like growth of plants filled the view, blocking the rest of the butterfly garden, but I wasn't appreciating the exotic flora at the moment. Instead, I leaned my cheek against the cool surface as I enjoyed the heat of my husband's tongue lapping eagerly at my sex. Within a few minutes I was shivering and shouting through my orgasm as Azrael pulled me more firmly against his mouth, but then suddenly he slipped out from beneath me and got to his knees behind me. His shaft glided into me and his body pressed mine against the glass. I cried out as Aziz spread my legs wider, and then grabbed my hands to hold them firmly over my head on the window. He slammed into me but kept his torso tightly against mine, pinning me to the glass. I learned something from my classmates, Azrael whispered in my ear. Something naughty? I glanced back at him hopefully. Oh yes. His smile matched his wicked tone. They call it the halo effect. Halo. As in our angelic halos, the powerful light all angels can exude. I use mine to give compassion when needed, he explained. But I heard that I can also use it to give pleasure, extreme amounts of pleasure. Shall we test the rumor? Yes, please. Azrael eased out of my body and turned me to face him. He knelt sitting back on his heels, and I straddled him with my back leaning against the window. The pillows had been pushed out of the way, and it felt as if I were on display. Even though no one could see us, in my head a window meant visible. A naughty surge of excitement filled me without the embarrassment of actually being seen. Then Azrael slammed up into me, and I felt even more naughty, as he bracketed my face with his hands and kissed me until I could feel it in my toes. I gripped his shoulders tightly as his hips started an easy rhythm. The scent of orchids and sex hit my nose, and the sweet taste of him tingled in my mouth as the sounds of our merging flesh smacked wetly around us. Then Azrael began to glow. A white haze drifted out from his body and seeped into my skin. My limbs went liquid for a moment, hanging loosely as my mind blazed with desire. Then it erupted inside me. An explosion of rapture, and I screamed from the onslaught of aching, tingling lust as my body worked without thought, slamming down on Azrael's cock as if I needed him to survive. I did. I couldn't live without that beautiful piece of silky flesh splitting me and filling me with heat. Every one of my nerve endings came to life in the most delicious ways. Azrael's eyes widened as I growled and shoved him onto his back. I held my angel down as I took what I needed, my hips hammering frantically against his, desperate to get his sex deeper into mine. My hands spread out on his chest and my feet dug into the mattress so I could bounce onto him violently. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. I dropped to my knees and shoved my breast against his lips. Azrael groaned in delight and sucked my nipple into his wet heat. He tongued me expertly, raining more sparks onto the unstable powder keg inside me. I kept pummeling our bodies together until the powder caught and blasted through me. I clenched around Azrael spasmodically, and his shouts added to mine. I collapsed over him, and Azrael clasped me tightly to his chest as if trying to hold us both together. Our breath started to slow along with our heartbeats. With a reverent touch he pushed back my wild hair and kissed my cheek. I love the halo effect, I whispered against his chest. Azrael and I laughed low and lustily together until he began to harden inside me again. Then the laughter turned back into love. Chapter 37. Sunshine drifted through the net that stretched over the top of the open air butterfly garden. The net was to keep the butterflies in while also allowing the rain and sun to nourish the plants. I luxuriated in the current sunlight as I stretched out on the soft grass of the central meadow in the garden. My cats were lazing with me, Kirill behind and beneath me, Lesya curled up on his other side, and Nick sleeping half over my stomach. The scent of tropical flowers rolled in and out like the tide with the warm breeze, while the sound of steady breaths and purring settled my soul. It was pure bliss. Then Nick got up to find something to kill. I suppose that's the way of all cats. We sleep, storing up our energy until we pounce. Nick woke Lesya, who crawled to her feet and tottered off to pick flowers. I adjusted my head on Kirill's chest so I could see his face. I'd rather stare at him than plants any day. He smiled softly at me and stroked my hair with a contented sigh. This makes everything worth it, Kirill murmured. Your head on my chest, our daughter happy nearby, and sun shining down on us, making stars in your hair sparkle brighter. I had a stripe of starlight hair just above my left ear, a pure white lock that twinkled like stars. It seemed ironic that they'd shine brighter in the sun, although come to think of it, they glittered in any light. The glow wasn't due to a reflection, it came from within the strands themselves. I'm not sure, but I think it may actually be stars, or perhaps an echo of them, or a reflection of the star inside me. And you looking at me like that, I added to Kirill's list of worthwhile things. I would do anything to keep that look on your face. Kirill pulled me up his chest, and I turned to slide over him, pressing my hands against his heartbeat as I pressed my lips against his. His fingers wove through my hair, pressing against my scalp to draw me closer. The smell of lion and man overpowered the blossoms around us, and I groaned into our kiss. It was just getting good when a laughing little girl pounced on us and ruined the mood. But neither of us minded. Kirill and I joined in Lesya's laughter as we turned to tickle her together. She squealed, throwing her flowers in the air, and a rain of petals floated down around us as she giggled. "We've received another summons from Athena," Odin said as he walked up. Now that was a mood killer. Our laughter died as Kirill and I stared at each other over Lesya's head. "Is it bad?" Lesya asked with a serious cerulean stare. "It could be Kodianak," Kirill said gently, "but Mama'll take care of it." "Okay," she said in the trusting way of children. Kirill looked at me. "You go ahead, I'll stay with her." "Thank you." I kissed him and then our daughter goodbye. Kirill gave me another grim look before he picked Lesya up. Then he pasted on a grin and tossed her up in the air. Lesya's giggles returned and Kirill nuzzled our daughter as I followed Odin out of the garden. There was nothing like seeing Kirill and Lesya together, their long dark hair swinging and their sapphire eyes sparkling. I decided to focus on that image and burn it into my mind as I often did when I killed someone. I remembered all of my kills to prevent myself from turning into a psychopath, but perhaps I'd been focusing on the wrong things. Maybe it wasn't death that would keep me sane, but life and love. We draw to us what we focus on after all. "Did Alex say anything?" I asked Odin. "Hestia is missing." "Hestia?" I asked in surprise. "So Narcissus didn't go for Apollo?" "It appears not." "Then he either got wind of Athena's plan or has other motivations." "I think Hestia is weaker than Apollo," Odin mused as we headed downstairs. "He's culling the herd and gaining confidence." "Humph. I didn't think Narcissus had the brains for that." "It's an animal technique, Vervain," Odin pointed out. "It doesn't require a lot of brains, just instinct." "Fair enough," I muttered. We stepped out of the elevator to find the rest of my men waiting for me. They were worried. Rarely did all of them feel the need to attend me. Even Toby was there, his long raven hair gleaming like glass. The black feather that hung from the end of the slim braid at his temple nearly disappeared into that darkness, but its magic made it gleam in a different way than his hair. Toby's strange eyes, deep blue with a ring of oak brown around them, stared at me steadily. All of my men stared at me in a similar fashion. "Yep, definitely worried." "We'll figure it out," I said brightly. "We always do." "I'm sure we will, Lala," Ree agreed. "It's just unsettling. I wish I'd never found that damn mirror." "I think it was the other way around and the mirror found you. Regardless, there's no point in wasting wishes like that." I kissed his cheek. "Better to wish for things you can have." "But all of my important wishes have already come true." Ree smiled tenderly at me. The other men didn't so much as groan. There had been too much raw truth in Ree's words. Ree's raw truth. Now that was kinda funny. But no, even I couldn't tease him after that naked honesty. "Mine too," I said instead. "More than I wished for." And that was the truth as well. My fulfilled wishes stood before me and played with our daughter in a butterfly garden above me. These men were my happiness. And if I had to fight every day of my life to protect that happiness, I would. And I'd count myself lucky. "I'm the one who let Narcissus out," I said. "If he's been taking the Greeks, I need to set things right. Let's hear what Athena has to say before we go vowing vengeance on Narcissus," Trevor cautioned. The guy rose my hackles, but we still don't know for certain that this is his doing. The other men grimaced at Trevor. "You weren't in that mirror with us." Trevor shook his head adamantly. "Everything was an illusion. Nothing could be trusted. It makes you really think about how things are perceived. I want some solid proof of who's behind this. I want to be certain I kill the right god, and I'm not tricked again." "It was confusing in there," I confirmed. "And you're right, Trevor, it messes with your mind. It reminds me of coming out of Iktomi's internet after he tortured me. Reality becomes suspect. You feel as if you can't trust your own eyes." "Iktomi," Odin hissed. "That's one son of a bitch I'm relieved to know is dead." "It took a lot to kill him," Azrael added. "At least we know Narcissus isn't that strong," I said. "If it is him, he shouldn't be too hard to kill." The men groaned. "Sorry." I grimaced. I didn't mean to jinx us. Don't concern yourself with jinxes, Rhys said confidently. The fates are on your side, remember. If only Rhys had known that those words were a jinx even worse than mine. Chapter 38. She was right behind me, Athena said. No more than 2 feet away. The Greek gods shuffled behind the Lady of Olympus. There were more than Olympians with Athena today. Torrent was still there with Artie, but there was also Morpheus, Dionysus, his wife Ariadne, Donnie's wife Amphitrite, their son Triton, and the Erotes, Greek gods of love. They all looked nervous. Their pantheon had just come under attack a few months ago. Triton and Athena were the most affected. Well, them Zeus and Hera. Zeus had been roasted over a campfire and eaten. You couldn't get more affected than that. Just tell us what happened, Athena, Odin said gently. We were all taking shifts watching Apollo, Artemis, and Torrent, Athena said. Hestia was with me, but I was focused on Apollo. I didn't think to look for her until the end of our shift. Anteros and Himeros came to relieve us, and that's when we noticed that she was gone. We went to her home, but she wasn't there either, Himeros said. Hestia never leaves the mountain, but we've searched Olympus and she isn't here. Show me where you. Before I could finish, a couple of Greek gods who I didn't recognize came in. With Cephissus they weren't dragging him exactly, but he wasn't coming peacefully either. Cephissus finally managed to pull his arms free of their death grips, though I think it was because they let him, and straightened his clothes indignantly. The 2 gods who were escorting Cephissus nodded at Athena and then took up positions near the door to the living room we were meeting in. I'd been in this room before, back when Zeus owned the place. It had an entire wall that was open to a terrace with an incredible view of Oceanus. Salty air shifted the chiffon curtains lazily. They looked similar to the ones that had been there before, but the rest of the room was very different. A baby grand piano immediately grabbed the eye. Its glassy ebony surface the darkest thing in the room. The rest of the furniture posed before the piano, upholstered in soft gray velvet, and a matching carpet covered the tile floor. To add a gleam to the gray, an abundance of mirrored surfaces invaded the room. Those surfaces were making me as nervous as the Greeks, but I refused to be cowed by reflections. The room would be good for me, aversion therapy. Cephissus plopped down on the only available seat, the piano bench, and glared at Athena. What do you want? Your son, Athena said. The council needs to question Narcissus, but no one has been able to reach him. Cephissus smirked. I'll tell you the same thing I told her. He jerked his thumb at me. I gave my son a part of my territory and he made it impenetrable. You can't pass through. No one can. How did he do that? Athena stood to confront Cephissus, and the river god paled. Tell me, Cephissus, or I shall hold you responsible for your son's actions. You can't do that. He shouted and stood. I had nothing to do with his choices. All I did was provide for my child as any parent would. You're harboring a fugitive, Athena said coldly. A murderer who may have killed 2 Olympians and the goddess of revenge. Those are grounds for execution, and if you keep us from Narcissus, I shall execute you instead. You can't. I can, Athena assured him. And I will if you don't start talking. I don't know how he did it, Cephissus growled. Narcissus must have told you something, Athena insisted. How do you get in touch with him? Cephissus clamped his mouth shut and glared stubbornly at Athena. Put him in a cell, Athena said to the gods who had brought Cephissus in. Perhaps the dungeons of Olympus will loosen his tongue. Cephissus' eyes went wide, but he kept his silence. The guard gods grabbed him by his upper arms and pulled him from the room. As Cephissus passed me, he gave me a vicious smirk. It sent chills down my spine. He knows something, I said after he was gone. I don't doubt it, but he's not talking, and I'm not feeling up for torture, Athena said, and then sighed deeply. I'll get back to him later. What were you about to say before he was brought in, Vervain? Oh, I wanted to take a look at the area where you last saw Hestia, I said. Of course. Athena motioned to the doorway. I'll take you there. I followed Athena out and everyone came with us. It was a large group too. Big for even Olympus elevator to fit us all. And yes, Olympus has an elevator. It runs from the boat dock in the cavern below to the peak where Athena's palace rules. We took it down 1 level to the main plateau where the other Greek gods of Olympus live. We had to split up to go down, but my men came with me. Athena didn't wait for the others once the elevator let us out. She immediately started heading into the maze of palaces, courtyards, and gardens with a confident stride. Athena took us to one of the smaller gardens that spotted the plateau. Construction I would have called a gazebo, except for the fact that it was made of marble, stood in the center of the verdant square. I suppose it could be called a pavilion. Around it, spindly trees spotted the area and other assorted foliage grew in controlled disorder. It was a good location for an ambush. Hiding places abounded. Athena took me to the hideout her and Hestia had been using, a nook behind thick bushes and under the cover of a collection of lemon trees. Right here. Athena pointed to the spot. That's where I was and Hestia was. Over there. She waved a little to her left. I went to where Hestia had been and took a deep sniff. Trevor did the same. My dragon senses outperformed his wolf, but it never hurt to have backup. I let my dragon rise inside my mind and change the scents into visible trails of color. There were only 2 traces left in the area strong enough to have been made recently, and I recognized one as Athena's. The other had to be Hestia's, a buttercream yellow that glowed softly. I followed it back further, into the trees where another scent loomed up. Narcissus, I hissed. Yeah, that's definitely him, Trevor agreed. He was right behind me? Athena gaped at us. And he took Hestia. I nodded. Their scents mingle. How did he manage to take her silently? Athena asked. I don't know, but I don't see signs of a struggle, Trevor pointed out. Hestia would never have blithely walked away with him, Athena scoffed. If there is one woman who can resist Narcissus, it's her. And Vervain, Trevor added. Athena lifted a brow at me. He's not my type. I shrugged. I'd ask if you didn't like gorgeous men, but your taste is not in question. She waved her hand at Trevor. Trevor gave her an angled head bow and a pleased grin. Narcissus is too pretty and not pretty enough, I said. What does that mean? Himeros asked. His group had just caught up to us. He's effeminate, I explained, and not nearly pretty enough to make me. Ignore that. My wife prefers masculine men. Trevor grinned wider. Regardless of his face. I waved it aside as I started following the trail. There is nothing attractive about Narcissus as a person. Definitely nothing worth betraying your pantheon over, and I'm certain Hestia would agree with me. He had to have compelled her in some way to follow him. His only magic is water-based, Triton pointed out. As a water god myself, I can assure you that there's nothing I could do to coerce someone into following me against their will. At least nothing that would be silent and leave no trace behind. They went this way. I didn't bother to comment on Narcissus' abilities. I'd save that discussion for after I found the end of the trail. We wandered over the pristine avenues, Greek gods stopping to stare as their leaders passed by in the wake of the Godhunter and her werewolf husband. Ignored them and focused on the trails instead. Hestia's pastel yellow and Narcissus' silvery gray. I tried not to be bothered or distracted by the fact that Narcissus' trail appeared almost reflective. I hadn't analyzed his scent inside the mirror, only catalogued it, so I didn't know if it had looked the same in there or if it had changed when he'd been set free. He certainly smelled the same, like hot asphalt after a heavy rain. Steamy and a little metallic. Suppose silver was an appropriate representation. That's Hestia's home, Athena said as I turned up a walkway. I glanced back at her and nodded. I had figured as much. I hurried up the steps and into Hestia's palace. The door was unlocked, but I doubt the Greeks ever locked their doors. It wasn't as if they were going to steal from each other. Although, after this, there might be a few deadbolts installed. Hestia's home swept back from the front door in an open and airy style that a lot of Greek gods gravitated toward. A sort of ancient minimalism. Contained a few pieces of scattered simple furniture, some rugs placed precisely to unite them, cool marble floors beneath the rugs, and some light decorations. No tiny treasures cluttered Hestia's end tables, nor did frilly fabrics invade to soften the rooms. Only prime pieces of statuary posed on pedestals or tables, along with a couple of dramatic vases to ease the monotony. It would have felt a little cold if it weren't for all the fireplaces. There was one in every room. They differed in size from moderate to giant, but no matter their grandeur, they were always the focal point. I forgot about the fireplaces as I followed Narcissus' trail. Hestia's had instantly melded with the remnants of her scent that lingered everywhere, but a distinct path rose stronger than the others. Despite this, I focused on Narcissus. He was the one we really needed to find. Trevor and I moved up a central staircase after Narcissus' silver scent, but then, in the middle of the stairs, it disappeared. Where is it? Trevor growled. Do you smell it, Manelska? No, it's gone, I said. It's almost as if Hestia's scent overpowered it. Not possible, Trevor said. And yet, it's completely disappeared. I glanced up and caught my reflection in a mirror at the top of the landing. My eyes were too wide, like those of a startled horse, and my cheeks were pale. I straightened my shoulders and turned to face the crowd of Greeks behind me. The trail ends here. What the fuck are all of you doing in here? A male voice snarled as a man pushed his way to the front of the group. The man wore jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Ask me if I care." He was blonde, slim, and fair-skinned, with eyes as dark as my hair and an expression that rarely wavered from disdain. Today, though, Momus looked scared. "I've had to ask several people where to find you," he went on. "At least you made enough of a spectacle of yourselves that I was able to follow the gossiping gods here." Momus. Athena approached him. "What's happened?" "It's the Fates," Momus whispered. "They're gone." Chapter 39. The Fates, also known as the Moirai, are three sisters who control aspects of fate. I say aspects because they're still just Atlanteans and no one controls everyone's fate. That being said, the sisters are powerful, at least where the future is concerned. No one messed with them, even Zeus had left them alone. But more than that, I like them. Well, at least two of them. Atropos is kind of bitchy. The Moirai lived together with Momus in a territory that they routinely changed. And I mean utterly changed, not just a revamp with a few new features. They would alter the landscape and their palace into entirely new versions. It was their way to compromise. They'd each get a turn at designing their home. The Fates tended to be influenced by movies and literature, which I wholeheartedly approved of. This latest theme was Avatar. Our growing group had traced over into Moirai territory, and we came out of the ether on the bank of a gleaming river. Strange trees grew everywhere. Even out of the water, their trunks dipped and lifted in graceful U-shapes, with roots draping from them in undulating lines. Night reigned with a full moon overhead, even though it had been midday on Olympus. But that wasn't the strangest part. Oceanic plant life sprouted among the shadowy undergrowth, glowing neon pink, lavender, and turquoise. Their surreal colors softly highlighted the forest. If anemones start floating down like dandelion puffs, I may squeal in happiness, I warned everyone as I started searching for the Tree of Souls. "Why is it dark?" Donnie asked. "It should be daytime over here. The Fates are in the same territory as us." Okay, so here's the thing. The Greek gods have an odd territory, shared with all of them but also broken down into smaller sections, sort of how Cephissus did with his portion, except on a larger scale. Several places were public out of necessity, to allow for human souls to travel through them. Then there was Olympus, that was public because of the community of gods who lived there. But there were also pockets of sub-territories owned by individual Greeks. Those pockets sheltered under the umbrella of the main territory but had the ability to ward themselves off. The Fates owned one such place. "Clotho likes the colors at night," Momus explained with a huff. "She keeps blocking out the damn sun. It was like this when they disappeared, and I haven't been able to figure out how to get the lights back on." Momus is the spirit of mockery, blame, and censure. He can't help the way he is. And yes, a spirit is another type of Greek god. The Greek pantheon is so immense that the Greeks ended up creating new titles. "Come on." Momus moved his arm reluctantly in a wave and indicated a bridge that spanned the lake in front of us. The bridge ended up being an enormous root, flattened for sure footing. We followed him over it and down a path lit only by those glowing plants. It led to an enormous tree, just as I'd expected, but it wasn't the Tree of Souls. This was a home tree. It looked a lot like the one in the movie, but I was betting that Clotho had added a few upgrades. I couldn't see her living without her creature comforts. The trunk of the home tree was formed of several smaller trunks that wound together into a single column until spraying out into a bouquet of branches that created a flat canopy far above. Momus strode into the shadows between the exposed, sinuous roots. Are you guys coming or what? He called back to us. We glanced at each other, shrugged, and went into the dark after him. Past the monstrous roots, the twisting trunks parted like curtains to reveal an elevator. I peered upward. The trunks must wind around the elevator shaft. How ingenious. Well, that ruins it a bit, Ree huffed. The ladies didn't want to climb a tree every time they left the house, Momus snapped. It's smart. Of course it is, I said as I got in the elevator. It's more than that in fact, it's awesome, and it's hidden so it doesn't ruin the ambience. Momus was being particularly touchy, and I was sure it had everything to do with his concern for his friends. He acted as if he didn't like the Fates, but I'd seen him smile secretly at the ladies. He was like a brother to them, and they were probably the only family he had. I give him some leeway for that. We got into the elevator. This one was large enough to hold all of us. Take that, Mount Olympus. And Momus pushed the up button. We zoomed up the center of the trunk and then came to a smooth halt. The door slid open to reveal a spacious entry room. The room stretched out over a flat-topped branch with walls to either side but nothing on the far end where the branch dangled over the ground. I walked forward in a daze to admire the alien landscape spotted with glowing islands of color. Exotic animal cries filled the air along with the scent of heady blossoms. Delicately beautiful furniture filled the room, built of winding pieces of wood and softened with fabric in the same colors of the glowing plant life. A chandelier hung above us, a nebulous shape dripping glowing pale pink tendrils. It looked alive, as if it would start moving at any second. It reminded me a little of the castle of Eight in Fairy, except that this was a touch more primitive and a whole lot more surreal and impossible dream compared to an attainable fantasy. Are you gonna gape at the view or help me find the Fates, Godhunter? Momus growled. Sorry, I muttered. Hey, Trevor growled far better than Momus. I get that you're concerned for the ladies, but you don't get to talk to my wife like that, especially since she's the best shot you have at finding them. Momus clenched his jaw and nodded. Sorry, Vervain. It's okay, Momus, I said gently. I'm worried about them too. It's just that this is a lot to ignore. I waved at the scenery. And I've got cat magic inside me. I can't help but be curious. Yeah. He sighed. Clotho outdid herself this time. Do you know where they were when they disappeared? I asked him. I think they were in their rooms. Momus scowled. I was watching TV in mine, and I came out for a snack. I realized that it was a little too quiet. Knocked on Lachesis' door, but she didn't answer. So I peeped in, but no one was inside. That was odd. They don't close their doors unless they're in their rooms. Then I checked on Clotho and Atropos and they were gone too. Searched the whole tree and then that stupid forest. He sighed deeply. Okay. I gave his shoulder a pat. Trevor and I will look in their rooms first. Thanks, Momus muttered. This way. Momus led us through a door to the left and into the enclosed areas of the home. A bright light came on to illuminate a normal hallway. Normal except for the bare, rippling tree trunk that formed the inner wall. Doors lined the wall. Opposite the trunk, Momus passed a few that were open. Sitting rooms, a library, and an empty bedroom went by before he stopped at a closed door. This is Clotho's room. Momus opened the door and stepped aside. Clotho had taken the theme into her bedroom. Woven trunks formed a barrier around her bed with only a small, arched opening on one side. Within that cozy bower, a thick canopy of leaves hung over the moss-green mattress. Polished wood gleamed beneath woven rugs below with a wooden ceiling crossed by branch beams above. A teardrop lantern hung from the center of the ceiling with glass petals peeling back from its bright center. To the right, a delicate vanity of polished wood wound with living vines grew out of the floor, and beside it a couple of spindly chairs made a delicate sitting area. Doors bracketed the vanity and chairs. Bathroom. Momus pointed at the door on the left. Dressing room. He swiveled his finger toward the one on the right. I nodded distractedly. I was already inhaling deeply, matching the traces I found in the room with my memory of Clotho's scent. She was everywhere, and there were other scents there too, but one I recognized as belonging to Momus, and the other two were Clotho's sisters. Narcissus hasn't been here, I said. I only smell Clotho, her sisters, and Momus. I get the same, Trevor agreed. No interlopers of any kind. Narcissus? Momus asked. What's he got to do with us? Isn't he trapped in a mirror? Not anymore. I grimaced. It's a long story. Someone else can fill you in. While I look through the rest of the house. Yeah, all right. Momus agreed with a sour expression. Lachesis' room is next door and then Atropos is next to that. Okay, everyone stay with Momus, I said. Trevor and I will search the tree. It will be easier if we don't have to deal with other scents jumbled in. Trevor and I went through the other bedrooms, both done in unique styles. Lachesis leaned more towards simple elegance and Atropos seemed to favor a lot of leather. I wasn't surprised that Atropos had once had a fling with Ree. Looked as if they were into some of the same hobbies. There wasn't any trace of Narcissus in their bedrooms either. So Trevor and I scoured the entire living space. It wagon-wheeled around the spoke of the home tree trunk, full of things I would have enjoyed spending time admiring. But I didn't have time for that kind of exploring. I kept my senses focused on the Morai sense until we made our way back to the group of gods who waited for us in the open-air entry room. The other gods had filled Momus in while we were gone, and he looked sad and sedate, sitting on one of the couches between Amphitrite and Ariadne. The women were trying to console him, but a man like Momus doesn't take comfort in hope. He knew better than that. Momus lifted his gaze to mine as I entered the room with Trevor. One look at my expression, and he knew what I hadn't found. They're dead, aren't they? Momus asked despondently. They're dead and we're all fucked without them guarding the threads. It'll be a right-up tangle. Now. Tangle, I whispered. That reminds me of something. The prophecy, Dionysus said as his gaze shot over to me. The one Silenus gave you at your wedding. Didn't he mention the threads? Yeah, that's right, I confirmed. He also warned me not to kill those rainbow gods and the bottled water goddess. I looked over at Trevor and he cursed. What just happened there? Dionysus stood and pointed at Trevor. What's that about? One of the rainbow gods warned Narcissus that Vervain would be entering his mirror, Trevor said. We think he was the one who made sure that Ree bought the mirror in the first place, I added. And now the fates are missing. Dionysus cursed and shared a worried look with his wife. What the fuck does a prophecy about not killing gods have to do with the fates? Momus asked. There was more to the prophecy, I said. It warned me not to take action, but then there was something about the threads of fate tangling. Let the threads of fate lie untouched or they shall tangle, Trevor quoted. I'll never forget it. It gave me chills. Lie untouched, I murmured. We could be making more of this than we should. No one's touched the threads. No, they've only touched the spinner, the allotter and the unturnable, Momus said, using the titles of the individual fates. It's another coincidence, Azrael said, and too many of those leads to conclusions. Has manipulated you into the mirror and now the fates have disappeared. All of them are tied to you through the future and the threads. The prophecy is neither helpful nor harmful. It's too damn general to be of use simply for its meaning. The only bit that's beneficial is the second line. It has drawn between you those gods and the fates. Two coincidences equal one conclusion. Yeah, but the conclusion is not necessarily Narcissus, I said. So far, Narcissus has no tie to the fates. Beyond the fact that they foresaw his entrapment and didn't warn him about it, Momus huffed. We all stared at him with slack jaws. What? He asked grumpily. Chapter 40. The pool in the center of our seats spewed up a wall of water between Gish and me, but he disappeared before he could reach the barrier. I relaxed out of my defensive position as the water fell back into the pool, and then I noticed that cause was gone too. You sent them both away? I asked in surprise. I didn't like what either of them was saying, Narcissus murmured as he stared at me thoughtfully. I don't think I shall let any of those three into my territory again. I've got what I want now anyway. My freedom and you. Narcissus, why are you doing this? Power and love? He shrugged. Love of power more like. You don't think I'm capable of love? Narcissus asked as he moved on to the love seat beside me and took my hand. Self-love, I said warily. Isn't love of the self a foundation for all other love? Sure, if you have the materials to build on it. I think I'm falling in love with you, Vervain, he whispered and then leaned forward as if to kiss me. Back up, psycho killer. I pushed him away. I'm still not interested. Narcissus roared as he stood, and then kicked one of the couches across the room. He loomed over me and then backhanded me into the wall. As I shook off the blow, he tromped over to me with fury in his eyes. I scrambled to my feet and faced off with him, but his stare lowered to my belly. Cold fear shot through me as he smiled wickedly. Narcissus balled up his fist and pulled it back. I think you're about to become far more accommodating, dearest. If not, your little bundle of joy will feel my wrath. You fucking psychotic zombie motherfucker, I hissed. You touch my child, and we'll fucking gut you. Narcissus laughed cruelly. I don't have the restriction the mirror did. I can kill your baby without laying a hand on you. He lowered his fist. One thought and I could sever a limb. Or his head. I went still. Now, I'm going to escort you to your room. He held out an arm to me and I trembled as I took it. And you are going to bathe and primp yourself until you're perfect. Narcissus started leading me down the maze of hallways. Unlike the mirror's world, these corridors didn't shift from reflective mist into substantial matter, they remained solid. I would have been reassured by this if there hadn't been an unsettling abundance of mirrors hung on the walls. Oh yeah. And if I wasn't on my way to get dolled up for my date with a serial killer narcissist. I shall return for you when I have everything ready for our liaison. Don't fret, dearest, you will enjoy it. I have had years to perfect my performance. As you've already seen. Narcissus opened the bedroom door and gently nudged me in. I turned to stare at him warily. Put that on after you bathe. I'll be back soon. He pointed at a crimson dress draped over the bed like a fresh spill of blood. Why do villains love to dress me in red? The door shut, and I had to stop myself from screaming. Chapter 41. I snarled. Can't I have one single pregnancy go by without someone threatening my baby? I was shaking with fury and fear. The last thing I would do was be more accommodating to that piece of murdering filth. But I couldn't let him hurt Vero either. Inside me, my son stirred as if he could hear my thoughts. With my other pregnancies, my children had been very active and had communicated with me through our bonds. Vero, however, had been silent. Could feel him there and sense our bond, but he was content to just concentrate on growing and let me handle the rest. He was a lot like his father in that regard. Except now he was making his feelings known. Vero wanted me to fight. Of course he did. From the brief time I'd been given with him in the future, I'd learned that he was the most like me out of all of my children. Vero would sooner have the both of us beaten to a pulp than have his mother lay down and peacefully spread her legs for an enemy. Even as a growing baby, he could sense the horror of that. All right, baby honey eyes, I said. We'll fight. We may not have a lot available to us in the way of weapons, but we'll do what we can. I just wish I had my fighting gear. It's easier to be strong in leather than gingham. Just as I was smacking at the gingham dress despondently, it disappeared and my old fighting leathers were suddenly on my body. I gasped and looked down at the black vest, a little snug around the waist, and my worn pants, exact replicas of my old fighting gear. I even had my boots on with their steel hooks in the heels and my beloved Wolverine gloves. What in tarnation? I whispered. And then I remembered how Narcissus said he'd share his illusion magic with me. I'd wished for a drink, and his territory had supplied it. Could it be that he'd never taken back his gift after his little demonstration? I wish I could find the fates. I gave it another go. A hallway appeared in the wall before me. No door, just an open passage. Well, would you look at that? I whispered as I rubbed a hand over my tummy. We may have a chance after all, Vero. Vero shifted and then settled. Yeah, I'll take it from here. I grinned. It was nice to know he had faith in me. I headed down the corridor but immediately jerked back. I thought I saw someone inside it, but it turned out to be my reflection. I chuckled to myself and shook my head. I shook it into infinity. The corridor was coated entirely in mirrors, and I was the only thing in it, so I seemed to go on forever in all directions. It was disorienting, but the passage wasn't long. It opened into another room, and the entry was already crowded with 3 women who peered in at me calmly. It's about time you got here, Atropos huffed when I stepped out of the corridor. Her bottle green eyes flashed and her auburn hair hung wild about her disapproving face. Excuse me. We've been expecting you. Clotho smiled brilliantly. She looked lovely, her chocolate brown hair done up in fat curls and her sky blue eyes filled with warmth. You knew, I hissed. We had a brief glimpse into the threads, Lachesis said calmly. We knew that Narcissus would be coming for us but saw that it was necessary for a better future for all of us. Lachesis was the allotter, the one who cut the thread of a human life, and she had ironically gotten the short end of the stick when it came to the looks department. Although she seemed to be young, her face was gaunt, making her black eyes appear massive as it aged her. The way she wore her black hair, pulled back severely from her face, emphasized her skeletal appearance, and she belted her gray toga just as tightly as her hair. A pair of scissors hung ominously from it, that belt. I was surprised to see the scissors. I would have thought that they'd have disappeared into the mirror border along with her. Magic change is coming for the gods, Clotho announced. It will be rough as all changes, but it will be good too. You put yourself in danger to make the future better? I asked in disbelief. I hope it's significantly better. We must all make sacrifices, Vervain, Lachesis said sternly. Nothing has been asked of us until now. It's our duty to tend the threads, Atropos added. And being separated from our magic briefly is hardly the worst sacrifice. Others have given their lives, Clotho whispered respectfully. You knew about them too? I asked in horror. You could have warned Nemesis. We didn't know about the murders until it was too late, Lachesis protested. But that was a blessing. We would have been tempted to stop them, and they needed to die. Poor Hephaestus. Atropos shook her head. He was never fated to be happy. Perhaps he'll have better luck in his next life. You didn't happen to see how I get us out of here, did you? I asked. We didn't actually see you getting us out. Clotho looked nervously at her sisters. What? We saw that it was necessary for us to be here. Lachesis took over again. And so we are. We trust in fate, Vervain. How could we not? Great, I huffed. Except fate has stuck us in Mirrorland without any magic. While our captor has loads of it at his disposal, seems that fate is laughing at us. Perhaps laughing and pointing. Fate never laughs, Lachesis said with the utmost seriousness. Okay. I held up a hand. Let me think. This will take a while, Atropos muttered. You know, it's a shame Horus is already married to Hecate, I said snidely. You two would have been great together. Cease your yammering and relieve us from this irksome confinement. Atropos tossed back. I gaped at her. Did you just quote Guardians of the Galaxy to me? Movie quotes are my thing. I'm getting really tired of people copying me. I thought perhaps if I spoke a language you understood, you'd get on with it. Atropos smirked. Fine. I gave her a sassy look. I wish I could free us from Narcissus prison. Great, that'll work. Atropos rolled her eyes. Clotho pointed at a wall. We all turned to look at a new corridor that had opened up. The one that had brought me to them had disappeared, but this one seemed identical to it. Completely coated in mirrors. What the fuck? Atropos blinked at it. Narcissus gave me access to his magic, I explained as I hurried to the hallway. Not enough to get my magic back, but enough to give me whatever I wanted within his territory. Within his territory, Lachesis repeated, which means that it won't let us out. And yet, it's given us a path. I waved a hand toward it. Atropos scowled at me and stepped into the corridor, and then promptly screamed. She lurched back into the room, shivering as her sisters rushed to help her. What is it? Clotho looked from her sister to the corridor with trepidation. It showed me things, Atropos whispered. I can't walk through there. I'm sorry. What are you talking about? I went to the corridor and peered in. A few seconds were all I could handle before I jerked back into the room. My loved ones were in that hallway, each one being tortured in horrendous ways. The scenes lingered in my eyes, traumatic even with that brief flash. I didn't want to know what Atropos had seen. The territory can't refuse your request, but it won't let us go easily either, Clotho whispered. We must get through that corridor, Lachesis said. We'll simply walk it with our eyes closed. And have the magic lead us off course? Clotho asked. I don't think we'll be able to leave if we don't look. The looking is the price of passage. Atropos began to whimper. I will look and the rest of you will hold on to me with your eyes closed, Lachesis said sternly. I'll lead us out. No, I said. I will decide, okay? When I realized I was quoting Bird Box, I felt more confident, more myself, and I added, I will decide, just give me a second. Lachesis and Clotho stared at me until Atropos finally lifted her stricken face and hissed, well, fucking decide then. I'll do it, I whispered. I've seen enough horrors to be able to overcome them. Your face says otherwise, Godhunter. Clotho shook her head. And you've already paid much more than we have to help fate. Just get her up, I said harshly. Narcissus was supposed to return for me soon. We don't have much time. Clotho and Lachesis nodded crisply and helped their sister to her feet. Atropos huddled between them as we went to stand at the entrance to the corridor. Lachesis grabbed my waist in a death grip. Atropos pressed herself against Lachesis' back, and Clotho caged in Atropos with her arms, holding onto Lachesis' waist. We were more a mass than a chain, but it would have to do. I led them into the hallway of horrors. Chapter 43. I sat in the fragrant grass of a serene meadow, in my own clothes, gaping at cause as my magic returned to me in shimmering waves. I took a deep, relieved breath as they all settled into place and my 9-pointed star glowed brightly in my chest. Around us stood the Fates, already glowing with the return of their magic. Cause reached down, a kind expression on his face, and helped me to my feet. Are you all right, Vervain? He asked. Am I? I gaped at him and then declared, reading rainbows, Cause. How did you do that? Narcissus said he wasn't going to let you return. Cause laughed before he explained. I left a little glimmer of my magic in Narcissus' palace and followed it back in. He was so confident in his mirror magic that he didn't bother to ward his territory. But how you were able to get through the mirror without losing your magic? Asked. Or at all. The Fates gathered closer. They were curious too. Rainbows don't cast a reflection, Cause said simply. Excuse me. I blinked at him. I have weather magic, he explained. But it's governed under the rainbow, which happened to be the only thing that could pass through Narcissus' mirrors without impediment. Rainbows are a specific set of reflections and refractions within water droplets that appear on the surface of an invisible cone. Oh great, he's talking science, I huffed. Okay. I'll make it simple and relevant to this situation instead of going on about the particulars of it. Cause laughed again. Mirrors can't reflect rainbows. Shit, I whispered, completely forgetting to use my creative curses. Narcissus couldn't take my magic even if he tried. Cause smirked at me. It simply could not latch onto my rainbows. Is that how you managed to alter the mirror curse to pull me in? I lifted a brow at him. That's not something I'm willing to share. He threw my words back at me with a smirk. Fair enough. I held a hand out to him. I'm not going to bother asking you why you did it. I'm just going to say thank you. This doesn't make us friends, Godhunter. Cause grinned devilishly as he shook my hand. It makes us even. I put you in that insane pervert's clutches and I couldn't in good conscience leave you there. He glanced down at my belly. Especially not when you're with child. As you like, I said. But I have to admit that I'm glad I listened to Silenus. And then I blinked. Holy cannolis, the prophecy. I glanced at the Fates and found all three of them smiling smugly. Cause needed to live so he could free me. The Fates nodded. But conversely, I held up a finger. He was the one who put this into motion. So, I wouldn't have wound up here if I'd killed him. No. Clotho asked. You don't think that some other god would have figured out a way to get you into that mirror? Narcissus was fated to be freed, Lachesis said. In one way or another. And I was fated to free the Godhunter? Cause asked in surprise. And us, God of Rainbows, Atropos added. You haven't just freed the Godhunter today, you've rescued an Olympian and the Moirai. That means you've earned the goodwill of the entire Greek pantheon. And that's no small thing. That may have occurred to me. Cause winked at Atropos. But then he went serious and looked back at me. But I want nothing in return. As I said. Vervain, we're even. Keep your word and don't hunt me, and I shall stay out of your way in return. I'm totally good. Chapter 44. We said goodbye to Cause and went our separate ways at Cephissus Tracing Pavilion. With Narcissus' death, the territory had reverted to his father. Cephissus didn't come out to confront us, and that was wise of him. I hadn't gotten my beating heart. But if Cephissus had stood in the way of me returning to my loved ones, I was in no mood for a river god's bullshit. I stepped out of Pride Palace's tracing room to the sound of arguing. How can you not have a spell for this? Your bedroom is full of spell books. Azrael demanded. You're the one going to Angel High, Odin snapped. Why don't you check the library there? I will. Good. Good. Enough. Trevor shouted. This isn't helping. Our wife is missing, most likely. Taken by that mad mirror man, and you're fighting instead of coming up with a way to get her back. I may have a suggestion, I said as I stepped into the room. Everyone, which included my husband, my boyfriend, the Intar, and the entire God Squad, stared at me in shock. All you need is rainbow magic, I said as I opened my arms. My men rushed over to surround me, and I hugged them tightly, letting their love wash away the trauma I'd been through. Still worth it. I'd do anything to keep this. My body relaxed against them as I sighed. Home again. Insanity crept back into the shadows of my mind. Then came the explanations. I told them all about my adventures in Mirrorland, and how Cause had saved the Moirai and me. Astonishment abounded over that, along with sage nods over the prophecy. But what hit me the hardest was Morpheus' silent tears for his aunt. I hugged him but didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Nemesis had been killed in the line of duty. It was a tragedy without reason, despite what the Moirai had said about it needing to happen. I couldn't tell Morpheus about fate. He wouldn't want to hear it. Knew I wouldn't if I were him. But what about Dissany and Gish? Finn asked in his slight Irish lilt. Do we have to worry about them riling up more gods? I don't know, I said softly. Probably. 'Cause said we weren't friends, just even, which I take to mean that he may still rejoin them. And what happens if Cause pulls another stunt like this one? Hades asked. Will you be able to kill a man who saved your life? As he said, we're even. I shrugged. I won't like it, but I'll do what I have to. Although, I don't think that will be an issue. 'Cause said that as long as I didn't try to kill him, he'd stay out of my way. It sounds as if we have to worry about the other two more than Cause, Thor concluded. But at least we know who to watch for. Death and rainbows, I said and smirked. What a combination. Although Gish is technically a god of war. 'Cause Rainbow was deadly enough to deal with Narcissus, Azrael pointed out. I can't argue that, I agreed. Odin was particularly fascinated by Cause magic and went on about rainbows, reflections and refracted light until I shook my head and gave up. I needed some sleep, in my own bed without the threat of abduction looming over me. But first I went to Fallon's suite where Sam was watching the girls. There was a lot of female shrieking while I hugged my daughter, and then it calmed enough for me to bid the ladies good night. I carried Lesya to bed with an honor guard of my men surrounding us. It was Lesya's bedtime, not mine, but I was so tired that Kirill had to take her up to her room while I crawled into my bed. The men took up posts around me, talking softly while I fell asleep. I didn't mind. The sound of their voices helped me feel safe enough to doze off. I didn't even dream I was too tired for that. I just slipped into blessed darkness and stayed there until Chapter 45. I took the next few days to relax. Olympus reeled in the aftermath of the death of two more Olympians. Hera had already been given the boot, so she didn't count, and I was told that there would be nominations for replacements made by the current Olympians and then they'd vote on who to elect. I was abstaining from the vote. I just didn't feel as if I knew enough Greeks to make a fair contribution to the proceedings. Besides, I had to get to Ferry for a birthday party. The members of the God Squad, including my sons Vidar and Valley, who were kind of honorary members, were coming to Ferry with me and my husbands and Toby. Oh, and Thrud. We were all pleasantly shocked when Thor showed up with his daughter. It was a large group that showed up at the end of the road, and Arak had to bring several carriages to accommodate us. But he didn't seem to mind. Athace, Arak murmured as he hugged me tightly. By the flames, I've missed you. Arak didn't have to go without me often. Usually I would jump back to nearly the exact time I'd left him. I didn't often need to let the times between the realms catch up so I could travel with others. It was even rarer that it took longer than a week. This time it had nearly been 3. I've missed you too, I whispered in his ear and just held him for a little while. I had missed him terribly. Love is not finite or even quantifiable. In my life it seemed as if the more I gave, the more I had to give. And Iraq got a lot of love from me. We'd had a rough start, but my dragon had become precious and irreplaceable. During this crazy crap with Narcissus, Iraq's counsel and strength would have been invaluable to me, but I didn't want to worry him, and there had been no war for him to fight. I'd even decided not to tell him about all of that until after our son's birthday. I didn't want to ruin his fun. Mother. Speaking of my sons, they had to get their hugs from me before they'd greet our guests. That was just their way. I reluctantly released Iraq and hugged my boys together. Not that I hadn't missed the twins. I'd missed them nearly as much as Iraq. But I had been enjoying being held as opposed to doing the holding. However, once they were in my arms, and I was inhaling the precious scents of Vervain sunshine and citrus and Rian sugar and smoke, my heart filled to near bursting. I kissed them on the cheeks. Mommy! Lesya cried from her father's arms. I want to see my brothers. Hello, Lesya. Vervain called from my embrace. Hey, sis, Rian added. He learned that one from me. Vervain. Rian. Lesya bounced until Kirill let her down, and then she came running over to hug the boys. You guys got bigger. You did too. Vervain's blue eyes were a shade lighter than Lesya's, but you could see the resemblance in their faces. It always lightened my heart and amazed me a little to see my children together. Perhaps it's egotistical to enjoy seeing myself in them, but there's the truth of it. I loved seeing pieces of me in my babies, but I loved seeing their fathers in them even more. Rian looked more like Iraq than Vervain did, especially with his crimson hair, but that was due mostly to the way the twins had been split in the womb. I wasn't sure how much of Iraq Vervain had gotten. It was possible that it was none at all. But that didn't matter to Iraq. Vervain was his son as far as he was concerned. Hey there, brothers, Vala said as he came up with Vidar. I smiled even brighter as I stood. Vidar had only a few bits of Odin in his face. He was mostly Sabine, but Vali was more his father's son. It was ironic, really, because Vali had felt as if he were second best to Vidar. After I had died back when I was Sabine and married to Odin, Odin had mourned greatly, and he subconsciously favored Vidar because he looked so much like me. Vali had suffered for that. Enough that Odin had made amends. They were better now, but I wondered if Vali knew how much like Odin he was, not just in looks but also in personality. I made a mental note to tell him. Vidar picked up Vervain and hugged him tightly as Vali took Rian, and then they traded with a laugh. It didn't stop there. The boys were passed back to the waiting crowd, and Iraq and I waited with Lesya, my grown sons, and Kirill, for everyone to get their fill of my twins. I appreciated that they included Rian in their exuberance, despite the fact that it was really Vervain who they were wanting to see. But then it was hard to ignore Rian. Do you know who I am? The steely voice swiveled my head in its direction. I'd forgotten about Thrud. Hello, sister, Vervain said solemnly. Thrud's stern expression cracked. You'll. My name's Vervain now, my son said gently. I'm different, but I still remember you. A tear dripped down Thrud's cheek as she held her arms out to Vervain. Thor passed Vervain over to her, and she hugged him tightly. It's okay, Thrud, Vervain said. I wanted this. I'm happy now. I gaped at my son. I knew he remembered a lot of things, but I hadn't known that he remembered how he had wanted a new life. Something inside me shivered. I was glad that he had his memories, but at the same time I felt as if he shouldn't. A new life should come with a fresh blank slate. Otherwise, what was the point? I love you, brother, Thrud said as she finally let Vervain go. I'm happy for you. Vervain kissed Thrud's cheek before he got passed along to the next person. Rian and Lesya had watched the exchange along with the rest of us. Vervain caught his brother's eye and nodded, so Rian just shrugged and let it go. But Lesya was still frowning. Hello, Lesya. Iraq bent to greet my daughter and distract her. Will you give your uncle Iraq a hug? Lesya launched herself at Iraq and giggled as he lifted her up to hug her and swing her about. Lesya loved Iraq, her dragon uncle. Every time I brought her to Fairy, she got so excited. I think she particularly liked how he could blow fire from his mouth just like Mommy. Uncle Iraq, I have a birthday soon too, Lesya said with a serious expression. Do you? Iraq asked her and glanced at me with a grin. And when is that? June 19th, she said promptly. Funny how children can never remember their bedtimes, but have no problem with Their birthdays. And is there something special you've been wanting? Arak knew exactly what his line was. Kirill and I both groaned. Lesya had been going on about a tea set for months. I knew it was coming, and then I'd have to get firm with her, something I didn't want to do on this trip. I want to be a dragon lion like Mommy, Lesya said gravely. Can you change me with fairy magic? We all went still. I glanced at Kirill in shock, but he just shrugged with a smile that seemed to say, she's your daughter. I scrambled for a way to tell Lesya that she couldn't be like me, but Arak beat me to it. I would never do that, Arak said with just as much seriousness as she had shown. You are the only you, Lesya. I don't want you any way other than as you are, and you shouldn't want that either. You were born to be a lion, princess, and help your mother lead the Intar. You will be even better suited to it than she is because you are pure, my darling. Please stay as you are. Lesya beamed up at Arak, and I gave him a grateful look that may have been a little watery. Okay, uncle, Lesya gave in. Then I'd like a tea set. I laughed, too amused to reprimand her. Kirill did it for me, taking Lesya back from Arak to say, enough with tea. Set Kodianak. You have chance to ask Fairy King for present, and that is vat. You ask for Itsked. That a ruined opportunity. Well, I asked him for magic first. Lesya scrunched up her face petulantly. I hadn't realized how much like you she is, Arak murmured to me. But she looks so much like Kirill, I countered, and then blinked as I realized it was similar to what Trevor and I had been saying about Vero. Perhaps I'll have more of an influence on my children than I thought. Not entirely. Arak pulled me against his side. You are definitely there. Face. Thank you for what you said, I told him. Then I went up on my toes to whisper into his ear. I'm going to rock your world tonight. You do that every night. Arak gave me a tender expression. Even those nights when you are not with me. Perhaps even more so then. You just keep racking up the points, dragon. I kissed him passionately until I realized that things had gone quiet around us. I looked up and saw everyone watching us. Then my sons, the little ones, giggled. And it set off everyone's laughter. All right, yes, it's so funny when I kiss my husband. I rolled my eyes. Get into the carriages, you savages. Chapter 47. The next day, the other royals of Fairy arrived, including the High King and Queen and their son, High Prince Luff. The prince was dating Eileen and immediately gravitated toward her after greeting us. The rest of the royals were shown to their rooms to freshen up before the activities began. First came the hunt, and it wasn't at all what I'd expected. Instead of an animal, we rode through the forgetful forest in pursuit of a golden apple. The Fae considered apples to be sacred fruit, and Arak had fashioned one from solid gold and then enchanted it. He hung his masterpiece in an apple tree in the forgetful forest and challenged our guests to bring it down with their arrows. The task would have been easy for anyone competent with a bow, except for the apple's enchantment. Once it was spotted, it remained for only a few moments before it would disappear to take up residence in another tree. The goal was to shoot it from its branch before it made a run for it. I had more fun than I've had in ages. Outside of the bedroom at least. 30 minutes into the hunt, laughter rang through the forgetful as our guests entertained each other with their magical and physical antics. They climbed trees and crept through the undergrowth like predators trying to sneak up on the golden apple. The hunt became about more than treasure, it was the win they were after. The pride of being the smartest, quickest fairies in the forest. The prize was finally brought down by the Earth Queen and her deadly aim. Her husband kissed her soundly for her triumph, and she proudly held the golden apple above head as she galloped back to the castle with the rest of our company cheering. We provided other activities for the children as well. They had their own apple hunt, but it was a bit easier than ours and didn't involve weapons. We held it in the Weeping Woods inside the borders of our kingdom instead of in the more dangerous forgetful forest. Not that any of those kids were defenseless. They came equipped with their own weapons. The Hidden Ones kids alone could have probably defended themselves and the others as well as a full-grown Sidhi. Later that afternoon, the adults gathered under a massive pavilion behind Castle Athen in the Fire Kingdom and watched the children play as we lounged about and enjoyed refreshments. That's when Arak announced the second game. Thankfully, it wasn't as strenuous as the first. What it was brilliant. It forced people to socialize. Not that fairies were antisocial, but there had been some strain between the kingdoms that was still in the process of being repaired. His game would help form some good memories between us. There is still another treasure to be found, Arak stood to announce. Every head swiveled to stare at him eagerly. Someone here is carrying a ruby the size of an egg, he went on. A pillager's egg or a joster's egg? The High King asked, and everyone laughed. A pillager is a small fairy bird, and a joster is a large one. It was akin to asking if the ruby was the size of a robin's egg or an ostrich's. A pillager, you greedy king, Arak said good-naturedly. But that's not all. Our pixies will create a setting for the ruby to the specifications of the winner. Whether you wish a pendant or a dagger, they will make it for you. The crowd cheered. It was a huge prize indeed. The pixies crafted amazing pieces of jewelry, accoutrements and weaponry from precious metals and jewels, pieces that Arak sold for a high price. My dragon happened to be a fine businessman. How do we find this ruby egg? King Fin of Air asked, his monarch butterfly, wings shivering with excitement. You must deduce who its bearer is, Arak said simply. I have enlisted the help of several people from each court to play roles in this game. Each one will hold a piece of the puzzle, lines of a riddle. After you collect all the lines, you'll be able to figure out who is holding the ruby. Now you cannot just go about to every person here and ask if they have a line of the riddle. You must hunt for them as well. They will each have something on their person that identifies them as a riddle bearer, something relating to the prize. You must locate these items and secretly notify the individual of your guess. You have guessed correctly, they will provide you with their portion of the riddle. Devious, Luff declared. I love it. Be as thorough in your search as you like, but stay away from my wife. She's not a bearer and I will not put up with any searching of her person, Arak advised them with a wicked grin. The fairies laughed, some groaning in feigned disappointment. The game begins. Good luck to you all, Arak declared. The game lasted long into the night, overlapping other activities. The twins were lavished with presents, had their birthday feast, and blew out the candles on their cake all before the ruby was found. It wasn't until late that evening, after the children had exhausted themselves by playing with the twins' new toys and were tucked into their beds, and the adults were dancing beneath dim fairy lights in our ballroom beside the lava flow, that a shout of triumph pierced the soft music. Everyone stopped their slow dancing and languid conversations to look over at Teheran. He hadn't been the one to shout. That had been Fin, who was pounding Teheran's back in congratulations. Teheran took the accolades with quiet delight as he held a crimson jewel aloft triumphantly. He turned and grandly presented it to his girlfriend Karnimata. The Hindu goddess beamed at her lover, took the jewel, and then kissed him soundly for his generous gift. Everyone cheered for both the triumph and the kiss. It was spectacular. Theater and the Fae love drama. Well done, dragon, I said to my husband as I pressed closer to him. American music played through the speakers Arak had installed in the ceiling. Hosier singing about worshipping his lover. The sound seemed surreal and anachronistic when danced to with the Dragon King in a fairy castle with a lava flow view. But I'd gotten used to such things a long time ago. Now it just felt like home. Or maybe that was simply my dragon. Thank you, Arak murmured. I'm glad this day has gone so well. And even more glad that it's night? I leered at him. Arak chuckled. Does that mean it's time for us to take our leave? I looked around the room. Odin had managed to steal Eileen away from Luff for a dance and was whisking her around the floor, but my other men socialized in groups around the edges of the ballroom, talking to fairies and drinking the strong sweet fey wine. They looked content and comfortable enough for me to leave them to their own devices. After this song, I said. I love this song. It's very poetic, he agreed. But a little sad. I prefer to worship you. With abandon. No sadness involved. I love you so damn much, I whispered. I would do anything for you, Athace, Arak said as he nuzzled his cheek. Against mine. And I can do anything. Remember that next time you need help in the God realm. I let him have that last jab because I figured I deserved it. And Arak was right, I did need to remember that. I'd been thinking that I was protecting him when all along he could have saved me. Maybe you should drill it into me again, I purred in his ear. Nice and hard. Arak groaned and swept me up in his arms. I guess I wouldn't hear the end of "Take me to church." But that may have been my fault too. I was totally at peace with that.